Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Customer Success Leadership Roundtable. I'm Andrew Marks, co-founder and architect of the Success Coaching Training Program. We're back for our monthly live webcast today talking about customer communities as part of your overall customer success strategy. This free learning event is brought to you by Success Coaching, the world leader in customer success professional development training with nearly 23,000 students globally on our skills development platform. Our programs are available in a variety of formats, from self-paced online learning to virtual instructor-led boot camps. As a matter of fact, our next level 1 certified success manager boot camp is being held March 20th through 22nd. You can earn your certification in just 3 days with the guidance of an expert instructor. Enroll today, save $300. Ashley will drop a link to our program page and any coupons we're offering right now into your chat. And you can find out more about our online learning and instructor-led programs and workshops at successcoaching.co. Now, for those of you who haven't participated in one of these events before, this is a live and unscripted discussion where we dig into a single topic that is relevant to customer success leadership. Regardless of the company that you work for, the scope of your role, or the size of the customers your teams deal with, we aim to pick topics that are going to be practical and useful to you. The schedule for our upcoming events can also be found at successcoaching.co. Click on the events tab at the top of the page to find out more. Now, one quick favor to ask. We posted something on LinkedIn yesterday, which I also reshared, on the top challenges leaders are facing this coming year. We would appreciate it if you would weigh in on that post. Ashley, could you please drop that link into chat as well? Awesome, you did. Thank you. A few housekeeping items before we get started. This webinar is recorded and we'll be posting a replay along with a transcript on our website early next week. We will be taking questions later on during the webinar, so please don't be shy and use that Q&A button found at the bottom of your screen to ask your own question or upvote one that's already there. And I do ask questions based on most upvotes. So if you see something that's already there, please upvote, and you like it, you want to hear about it, upvote that. We're also broadcasting on LinkedIn Live and have somebody monitoring that feed. Thank you, Tracy. So if you have questions, please post them and they will be relayed to us. Also, please keep all commentary to the chat window and questions to the Q&A window. There's a lot of thought leadership out there, along with a lot of theories about how to deliver customer success. In this series, we focus on the practical real-world advice, best practices, techniques, and shared experiences from those working with or leading customer success teams on a daily basis. And to do that, we invite 3 panelists to join me for a roundtable discussion. These are people who are great at their craft and ask them to share their experiences and perspectives. So without further ado, I would like our panelists to introduce themselves to y'all, talk a bit about who they are and what they do, and let's get started as usual in alphabetical order with Brian.
Well, thanks for having me, Andrew. Thanks for everybody for joining us here. I'm Brian. I've been building communities since like the mid 90s. So got on the train very early, worked at some community platform vendors, worked at companies building community teams and community as a function for sort of cross-collaborative ROI. Success is one of those things, but obviously, there's support, there's marketing, there's product, there's on down the list, which I think we're going to talk a little bit about. And these days, I'm a consultant, so I am yet again helping more companies figure out how to build community and how to think about it and how to get value from it.
Awesome. Thanks, Brian. Thanks for making the time. Jay, you're up.
Hello, everyone. My name is Jay Nathan. I am the Chief Customer Officer at Higher Logic, a community software company. And I've been in B2B tech for about 20 years, a little over 20 years now, and have run services teams, have spent time in product management, was an engineer when I first got out of college. I have been leading customer success organizations for the past 10 or 12 years now. I talk about this stuff and do a lot of interaction with both customer success teams and B2B SaaS organizations who are looking to launch communities. So excited about that. I also am co-founder of a community called Gain, Grow, Retain, which is for customer success leaders, which Andrew and Tiffany and Brian and many other people, maybe even on this call, have been a part of over the years. So very excited to talk about this topic.
Yeah, highly recommend joining GGR if you haven't done so already.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jay. And last but certainly not least, Tiffany.
Hey everyone, I'm happy to be here. My name is Tiffany Timmermann. I have been in customer experience for about the last decade. I have fulfilled almost every function in a customer department organization, from frontlines individual contributor all the way up through executive strategist. I have spent a majority of my career building up customer experience departments at fast-paced SaaS startups like Atlanta's SalesLoft and Calendly, now out in the Silicon Slopes here in Utah. Very excited for today's conversation. Community has been such a critical component of my ability to scale out these organizations. And I think it's exceptionally important this year as we look towards the current macroeconomic climate. So I'm very excited for today's conversation. Happy to be here.
Awesome. Once again, we all appreciate the time that you're spending with us today. Now let's get to the topic at hand. When I saw that Ashley put this topic on the schedule, I thought, what are we going to spend an entire webinar talking about on communities? I mean, there are so many challenges with communities. The quality and the accuracy of content is always going to be a problem. It requires time and resources to manage, and it's prone to negative comments because people like to complain more than they like to compliment. So why are we even talking about communities, and why does it matter to a customer success leader?
Well, look, at the end of the day, I think it should be all about business value, right? And ROI. If people are thinking about building a community, or maybe this is the first time you're hearing about it and you want to know what it's about, we could talk all day, right, about tactical things. But I think at the strategic level, the reason why communities are valuable is that it helps you build an engine for your peers and their peers to collaborate with each other. And when done properly, the downstream effects of all of those things within the context of success anyway are happier customers, easier upsells, better stickiness, CSAT, NPS, lower churn, lower CAC, et cetera, right? So we've been around long enough now doing this with community that we can actually prove those things, right? And we can tell real stories about real companies who have saved tons of money, generated tons of money, and or just made their overall success operations way more efficient, which is something everybody, I think, is interested in these days, especially in tech, with the way budgets are, right? How do we do more with less? And it turns out that community can be one of those things.
Can we get more specific on that? Can we get some examples of where rolling out that community has had that kind of that kind of positive impact? Anybody have an example?
Go ahead, Andrew. Go ahead, Brian.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of them, right? We've all heard the Trailblazer, Salesforce story, right? I worked at a company once upon a time called Alteryx, and we measured all of those things and more, and were able to prove that we were saving the business millions of dollars a year and generating millions more in other ways. Ultimately, community succeeds best, and this is what you'll find, right? So you start looking at examples of communities out there in the world. What separates the good from the great? It turns out that what separates the good from the great is that the great are really good about community being a cross-functional initiative, right? So it's probably owned by, one group in the company and something like that. But it turns out when you can actually bring together all kinds of folks across your company, you can deliver a lot of different value. There's tons of different stories, that we could get into.
I think it's one thing to be able to prove it in the numbers, especially when you are fortunate enough to be at a more sophisticated organization. But I think if you kind of get back to, the scrappy startup mentality then too, the impact on, CSMs, for example, to be able to, focus on the activity that actually moves the needle of the business versus being a glorified support agent, or, plugging holes or trying to maintain the status quo. When resources are finite, having a forum where customers can help each other. And like you said, the teams can build those cross-functional relationships, and be able to then have, a more impactful influence on the things that are going to help scale the organization goes a long way as well.
Yeah. And I'll just throw in, Andrew, I think that maybe the most common use case for communities that people will recognize immediately is reducing the cost and the effort associated with your support team. So many times you'll have a community environment with a knowledge base, community discussion forums where customers get answers from that before they try to call. They actually want to self-serve in a lot of cases. I was reading a book. I always quote this book. It's called The Effortless Experience by Matt Dixon. If you haven't read it, I would highly recommend it. The whole thesis of that book is stop trying to delight your customers and just reduce their effort. And in that book, he stresses 80+% of customers actually do try to solve their own problems before they call you, which sort of proves the point that they want a lower friction experience. Getting on the phone or having to send an email and wait on you to get back to them is a very labor and time intensive thing when it comes to getting your problem solved. That's just the support use case. We can go into more, but I would ask everyone on the call this: is there anybody who's in a customer success team today, whether you're a CSM or a director of CS or a VP or a chief customer officer, are your CSMs overloaded today? Do you feel like they're doing too much? They're having too many one-off conversations with your customers about the same things over and over and over? I know I've seen it in my own teams, as I've watched Gone calls, as I've joined calls with my teams. And so I am seeing, in addition to that support use case, just a vast opportunity to reduce the workload on a CSM team. And like Tiff said, to let them get more strategic, to stop answering the same questions over and over and over, to get help from their peers. CSMs are great, but they most of the time haven't sat in the seat that their customer sits in. Customers want to interact with their peers, benchmarks, understand what's going on. Communities offer a lot of those opportunities. So I'm sure we'll dig in more from here.
I mean, I would say, like, as a manager, right? Like, how many times a day do you ask your team when they have questions, what resources have you looked through for the answer? Or what does so-and-so think about this? Like, did you have a conversation with your peer? So what if, the magic happens when you take that approach with, customers having those engagements with each other?
Jay, you're reminding me when you were talking about the data, right? That often one of the ways we assess our communities working, are they delivering value, are customers getting what they need, is through surveys, right? And oftentimes in those surveys, we're looking for people to tell us, I came to this community to solve a problem or get an answer. I found what I was looking for. And had I not found what I was looking for, I would have called my CSM or I would have called support. And that's how we get the deflection. But one of the key insights that I've had over the years are the people who tell you kind of the opposite. Like, I came to the community to get support. I didn't find what I was looking for. And then when you ask them, what are you going to do next? They basically indicate I don't know. I have no idea what I'm going to do next. And that's the most dangerous group of people, right? Because what that means is, for the people that we're not serving in this scalable self-service many-to-many way, we're just losing them, right? They're just going to be frustrated. They're going to be angry. When your CSM does get a hold of them, it's probably not going to be, happy times. The renewal becomes harder, et cetera, right? So we know from the data that we have across, hundreds of communities out there that this works, and that, you're putting yourself at risk if you actually don't have something like this.
I guarantee you that the customers in your book of business that are most at risk are the ones that you haven't heard from, not the ones that are saying bad things in your community or submitting a bunch of support tickets. It's not about that at all. I completely agree with you, Brian.
Yeah, at least the ones you're hearing from are engaged.
That's right. Yeah, there's data to back that up as well.
Care enough to complain.
Exactly.
Right. Yeah,
they care enough to complain. okay, so let's take that next step. How do we even start? How do we even get started thinking about deploying a community, right? How do we start thinking about moving to this one-to-many and then a many-to-many kind of approach in supporting our customers? It's call deflection is always big, but so there's I mean, it's not hard to articulate the potential return on the investment, but how do we get started? Make sure it's, we're not trying to do something big bang, but we're trying to do something that makes sense and incrementally grow it.
Well, I don't mind jumping in, and I will tell you this, as the guy who sells community technology platforms, the first thing you should not do is buy a community technology platform, right, Brian? Right, Tiff?
Sure.
So what I would do first is I would actually look at where the volume of inbound needs come in from your customers both in your support cases. If you use a case management system, which I hope you do, Zendesk or Service Cloud or whatever you use, what are the most common items that come in from your customers? What are the things that drive 80% of the volume in your support team and in your customer success team? So you got to understand what the needs are of your customers are first before you begin to try to put a solution in place for that. So I'd say if you really want to start simple, start with some data to understand what's driving your workloads. And I'll turn it over to my colleagues or my friends here to add more to that.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's true. I was just looking at the Q&A, and there's a question here kind of about startups, right? And we all know that, I think, hopefully that communities are different depending on where they are and what their goals are and things like that. But I think regardless of where you're at, what size company you are, how many employees you have, and any of those kind of attributes, right? What sector you're in, you got to start with strategy, right? You got to start with, why are we doing this? And what are the business goals? What are we trying to affect? What are the outcomes that we're trying to build? And to Jay's point, instead of running out and buying some tech, I think it makes a lot of sense to take a step back and say, what are our goals? What's our strategy here? And how are we going to do this in a phased approach? To Andrew's point, it's not, let's conquer the world all at once here, right? Like, let's do some basic things. Let's do some trials. Let's figure out what it looks like. And then I think once you've done that, then we can go buy some technology and, do a whole thing and be a big success story. But I think the phased approach is generally one that works best. And it all starts with strategy.
I'll add on to that too. Once you have identified what that vision is, whether, it's knowing the specifics of your business and your customer base as well. Like, is this going to be a place where we talk about use cases and best practices? Are we going to be product centric? Do we want to be thought leaders? Things like that. Understanding those desired kind of outcomes of what kind of conversations you want to be facilitating, then also, from a tactical getting started perspective, identifying who then across your organization, needs to be a stakeholder in that. How is marketing positioning it? How are PMs engaging with product feedback and so forth? And so just kind of similar to designing your customer, organization in and of itself, like look to who are the people, who are the process, and then what tools do I need to be able to facilitate this?
I think, Tiffany, if I could just add one other thing that, we heard the same thing again, right? The collaboration piece that we were talking about before. And one thing I want people, kind of watching this to know that I think is valuable is that when companies, come to me or come to Jay or whoever it is and say, hey, we want to build a community, right? Ostensibly, they come to us to build a community, and we do that, right? And everything's great and all that. But what actually ends up happening, and I'm sure Jay can vouch for this too, is that what we really do is actually help their company become more customer-centric overall, because the community initiative inherently, because of the collaboration required to make it successful, means that you have to get closer to everybody in the company, right? And they have to get closer to understanding who are our customers, what do they care about, why are we doing this, what are the outcomes going to be? And so I've always really enjoyed the fact that community is a forcing function within organizations. We're we may be thinking about doing it externally. Hey, we're going to go build this customer community. But to do that first, we have to like look inward, right? And we have to kind of fix our stuff and make sure that we're all aligned in doing that. And so I think it's one of the great benefits too, is that most companies come out of, their first community launch or whatever being way more customer focused overall than they were 6 months before, or, whatever the timeline looks like. And I think that's a huge thing that every company, could use.
Yeah. Andrew, can I give you two very specific examples of how to maybe get started as well? I'll give you one from Gain, Grow, Retain, and also we're doing it at Higher Logic with our own customers. And then another one from another friend of ours at Pendo. But one of the things when we launched the Gain, Grow, Retain community, the first thing we did was launch a weekly call. You know that. You were on a bunch of those calls.
I was on them. Yeah.
And probably other people on this call were as well. And that's where the community actually started to take shape. But it was a persona. It was a very specific role that we knew, customer success leaders, that were going to have similar problems at the beginning of the pandemic, right? And we facilitated discussions sort of like you're doing now, Andrew, and we brought those people together. There are people today who have relationships from those early calls that we did, and those shared experiences and those shared challenges that they went through during the pandemic. They're still friends, and some of them work together today. So that's a really easy thing to do. Customer success teams can do that as well. We actually launched office hours for our customers. We have a couple different products on each product. So people who are community managers in our tools can get together on a semi-weekly basis, and they can actually, I think it's bi-weekly, not semi-weekly, isn't it? I always get that backwards, but they can get together, they can share best practices and stories. We facilitate those calls. That's a really great way to get things started, and also identify people who are going to be instrumental in helping you grow the community in the long run. We call those champions, right? Or advocates or ambassadors. So that's one idea. The other idea is, I love this example. In customer success, you often have new users that join your customers, right? All the time. And you got to train them and get them up to speed. Our friend Erica Aykroyd, and we've recorded a podcast with her, so I'll share all this with you. It's all out public, but they had a scaled customer success team, or a pooled customer success team, where they had a group of people who were responding to inbound requests from customers in an email inbox. They were fielding per CSM like 4 or 5 new user onboarding calls per week. I cannot think of a more mundane, repetitive thing, and costly and expensive and quality issues to have to do on a weekly basis than do 5 to 10 new user onboarding calls per week per CSM. If you have 5 CSMs, it's like 250, 300 of these calls per year, maybe more, right? Why not condense that down and start a program for new user onboarding where you run it once a week at a very high quality level in a webinar style setting, question and answer, right? Use the tools that you already have available to you today, like Zoom. So we talk about customer success programs or scaled programs a lot. That's the kind of thing that I think about that is part of the whole community ecosystem that you may put in play to help drive and scale your customer success practices, even while you're launching other elements of community, which allow your customers to interact one-to-one or many-to-many. So I don't know if any of those examples.
So I love that. Yeah. And I know Eric, I worked with Pendo for quite a while. They've done a major transformation in their customer success strategy and execution. But what's the how behind getting your customers out of the inbox and support queue and engaging with the right people, Tiffany?
I think, from a strategic perspective, I'll kind of maybe take that one in 2 buckets. The first one being from a broader organizational level, you want to make sure that you have the process and the right people and the SLAs in place. So I won't go too nitty gritty there unless there's some specific questions in the follow-up. But then secondly, starting with the core tenet of customer experience, like whatever you want your customers to do or you need them to do, make it easy. Is it an idea, a question? Whatever reason they may have been coming into your inbox before, if the forum, strategy is clear to yourself or your support counterparts, whatever your role may be, then you can have that kind of playbook, so to speak, to get the customers out of your inbox and into the forum. So from a very like tactical, granular level, like, actually giving them the link of where you want them to go. Is it a new post that you're creating on their behalf? Is it sending them to a related post and asking them to comment, like it, upvote, share with their peers who may, have similar questions or, advice to give, really get the engagement there. I think also internally, that's a fantastic conversation kind of thread to make sure that your PMs are following, that marketing's following. So, if you have those regular cadence of check-ins internally and the stakeholders are all involved, review those, engagements and see what you can do even better to get ahead of it, going forward. I think, from there, I think, again, how is the forum organized? Is this, again, an idea? How are customers accessing it? So right when you want to make it easy, are there, a direct link in your website, in your app, in your knowledge base? Do they have to create a separate login? Or, can you partner with product then when you're implementing it to maybe have SSO or something like that? So, kind of keeping that experience that you want the customer to have and design everything around that. And from there, you can build the playbooks and, actually see the results and the momentum pick up with those customers.
Make it frictionless, make it easy. Maybe
effortless experience.
Maybe you answer, but redirect, or maybe you just inform them, hey, that's available here. And here's the link, right? Not just, hey, go to the forum.
Right. Because if I'm a new user or someone who's not particularly tech savvy and you tell me, well, go add that to the ideas portal and I don't know what that is or where it is, I'm not going to do it. And you will probably never hear from me again.
Exactly.
Yeah, I think I'll just say that, oftentimes people think of these communities as a replacement for something else they were doing before, right? Which might be the case, and that's fine. But the question is, what's the bar? Oftentimes people will come to me and they'll say, hey, we're having trouble getting people to engage. We're having trouble getting people to sign up. We're not seeing much traction. And the question I ask is it better than what they had before? And I want people to be honest about that, right? Internally, it's like, if we wouldn't want to use this thing, or if it's not better, or cheaper, or faster, or easier, or whatever it is for them, then of course they're not going to use it, right? And so that's why we come back to the strategy piece to say, are we actually making this better for customers? And then when we do that, people will use the community, they'll enjoy it, they'll get value out of it. All of our metrics will look good and our value will flow. But I think that if we're expecting like, hey, we're just going to launch this thing and it's going to solve all of our problems, that often isn't the case. And there's some work to do there.
Yeah. Feedback matters.
Yeah. And I think there's also this idea, and there's other questions in here that this may touch on as well. But the idea that if you make your community the central place to go get support, to go get learning resources, make it the hub for more than just back and forth discussions between customers, then that's going to actually be of benefit. So you could go check out like community.mural.co or community.smartsheet.com, for example, and see exactly what I'm talking about. These are central landing places where all of the resources that you might need as a customer are in one place. And if you continue to pile value into that community, then customers really don't have another choice, do they? They have to go to that place to get the insights and the content and the learning and enablement that they need to use your product well.
Well, and could the community has anybody rolled out community as kind of front-ending support? Hey, in order for you to get support, you need to go through the community site.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. The question I ask again is it better? Right. So like a lot of people will try to replace their traditional support function with, like overnight, like we're turning off the case portal and whatever, and we're turning on a community and like, best of luck, everybody, kind of a thing. And there's a way to do it, but yes, there's a lot of communities where they are the front end of support, and that is where people are encouraged to go. And even when you want to submit a ticket or, a case or whatever you got to call it in your organization, you still have to go through the community, sign in, maybe the portal is there. And even as you're typing in your question or your whatever for the ticket, it's like, hey, here's 5 other things from the community that might solve this. So we do a lot of different things to put the community in front of support, not as a way of making it harder for people to get to support, but actually hoping that we can solve their problem better, cheaper, and faster for them. And then we'll get the benefit on the back end, right?
Right.
Yeah, on the faster side, for sure. Another tactical takeaway is when you have a system like Zendesk, for example, you can customize the auto reply when the ticket is submitted. Link straight out from there to, the knowledge base or the forum. Let users just be explicit. Tell them you might find your answer here faster than we might be able to get back to you. And people generally, more often than not, will go look. If you are, data driven in how you, review how people are engaging with those resources and understand, like, does this exist or do we need to create it based on what people are searching for? People will start to come back and self-solve those tickets, self-deflection, if you will, which again then has its back-end benefits to being able to either not have the ticket in the queue anymore, or at least be able to provide context to the agents that someone has gone and looked. Maybe they did find it, maybe they didn't. Here's what they did next. And really be able to then, as an agent, jump in and get to the core of the issue rather than the back and forth on, well, did you try XYZ first?
Now, it's not all, rainbows and unicorns. There are definitely challenges. One of my previous company, I started as head of post sales, and the first week I was there, in my first executive staff meeting, they were talking about rolling out the new community. And when I asked who was responsible for it, they said there was nobody that was going to be doing it full time. And I'm like, whoa, full stop, right? There's effort that's required here to manage the community. And I look at that as one of those challenges, right? It's not a set it and forget it type of thing. I've actually had some experience with one of my vendors where, they clearly don't have enough management, because I go and I get the answer, but the answer is wrong. It's not up to date. It's not accurate. So there are these, what other challenges are some of the challenges that you face when building a community? It's not a Ronco oven. You don't set it and forget it, right? It requires constant to kind of maintenance and upkeep. I mean, the return on the investment is huge. I think we can all agree with that. But yeah, you gotta put something in.
Yeah, listen, I think like anything else in a company, you got to look at it as an investment, right? And you got to think about, what do we need to do to nurture this investment? You mentioned one of them is you probably need to hire someone who's done this before. Dare I say, also get a strategic consultant, whatever. But like the truth of the matter is that this is an educational exercise inside of community or inside of companies, right? Because if you've never done it before, then you've never done it before. And so why would you have the knowledge, right? And so one of the things that's always highly recommended, wherever you find it, is to bring someone in who has some knowledge and can help you sort of jumpstart this thing. And do that education internally to basically what we're doing here to say, why are we doing this? Why is it important? How's it going to help me? What's the impact to my team going to be? What can I expect to get out of it? If you don't take the time to do those things, then it's no surprise that ultimately it's like, well, we launched this thing and it's just sort of sitting there and not doing anything. What I tell people is that, there's definitely a lift, right? Like we're not here to tell you just launch a community and life is all good, right? We've talked about the collaborative part of this, of bringing together, especially customer facing subject matter experts across your company and basically convincing them that, hey, look, if you spend a little bit of time every week or every month or whatever the commitment can be, contributing to the community, right? Contributing that your knowledge and basically getting what's in your head, like onto the screen, that in the longer run, that may be a little bit of work for you up front, but in the longer run, what you're going to find is you don't have to answer those questions anymore. Right. And so it's like, if I have to spend 20 minutes writing a knowledge article or answering a question on the community, that's a great use of my time as a CSM or a support agent or a pre-sales architect or whatever, because now for the rest of the time, I can just direct people to that solution on the community, right? And ultimately, that's how you're going to scale. And like I said before, be more efficient with the resources you do have.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think one of the other common things we hear about from companies who have not yet started a community, and Andrew, you sort of alluded to this at the beginning, is what happens if people say bad things about my product or my company in my community? And my community is operative there, right? Because that's exactly what you want. You want to hear that stuff in your community, in a place where you can actually respond and it's happening. Because guess what? People are saying bad things about you right now in places you can't see and you can't respond to and you can't control. So I think it's one of the perceived risks. And it is a risk. You got to mitigate it. You have to do a good job of, keeping an eye on your sites and the discussions that are happening around your product. But that's one that I hear a lot as well.
I mean, I think it's a commitment to being more open, right? And understanding the trade-offs of, if we're going to invite discussion and be more open as an organization, there are real returns for us to get on that. But it also means that we need to consider some of the consequences of that. And I think there was a question in the chat earlier. Someone was saying, what do you do when your company thinks that all your documentation is like their competitive advantage and no one should be able to see it and whatever. And I always tell people like a few things about that. Number one, in this day and age, if your competitor wants your documentation, they probably have it.
You get it.
Number two, if your documentation or your knowledge is your competitive advantage, you're a product company, you're probably in trouble as well.
Yeah.
And the reality is that, we actually took a different tack at a company I used to work at, where we built community, that my goal was to put as much publicly available information as possible without getting fired. That's what I told people my job was, right? And part of that was a calculated strategy to say, our competitors can come here and spend all day reading all this stuff and trying to copy us. By the time that feature gets out the door, if in fact that's what they want to do, we're already working on 4 features later, right? And so there's certainly things to be aware of, but to be honest, I just haven't found it to be a problem. And if you do have something that is super proprietary, that's why platforms like HireLogic have permissions, right? Where you can say, hey, there is a private area of the site that's only for select customers, where we put the secret stuff or whatever. There's ways around that, right? We've been doing it for a couple decades now. It's not usually a problem.
Yeah.
I want to go back, I guess, to like the, complainers, so to speak. I think there's a huge opportunity there as well to really take control over their perception of trust and transparency with your organization, with your team. We are going to whiff it from time to time. So, if and when we do, own it, let people see that, build that environment where they know that they, will get the facts from you, that you're not just going to fluff things or tell them what they want to hear. Like, people want that realness and authenticity in their engagements. And those are the types of experiences that will set you apart from competitors who, might engage in less than ideal tactics when it comes to managing those expectations or responding to complaints. So whether it is in a controlled forum or even, in a more public space like, G2 or something like that, like those are opportunities for sure to let people know, hey, we're watching this. We care about what you're saying and we're doing something about it.
100%.
That's another good point. Just to tag on to it real quickly, the community, yes, over time, you probably want to have your own community, but there are places where your customers are already in community with one another somewhere. It may be on, somebody asked a question about LinkedIn groups or Facebook groups. And like
already talking about you somewhere.
Those are, they may not be ideal in the long run, but there are places that you need to go get involved. So there's a community strategy, which is, we're going to have our own owned area for customers to work together. And we're going to have other areas that we go and participate in as a business because it's important, because customers are going to meet there whether we like it or not.
Exactly. All right, let's answer some questions. Once again, use a Q&A button at the bottom of the screen to either ask or upvote a question. Our first question which was erroneously moved to answered. It's from, thank you, Jay, is from Kimberly. Kimberly, good to see you again, Kimberly. Thanks for the question. What are your favorite ways to incentivize customers to participate in a community? For example, badging, gated super user communities, featured customers of the month, etc. Who wants to? I don't know, Jay. Why don't you want to jump in on this?
Yeah,
one?
Sure. Since I hit the button and erroneously answered it, I should owe you an answer. Well, yeah. So most community platforms have gamification tools that allow you to assign points for certain activities. They even allow you to integrate activities from other things. If they attend events or if they get certifications, you can integrate those in. So that's a very good one. I think the way to get people to really participate in a community, though, is by giving them value, right? And for some of your users, that's going to be like putting them on a pedestal, right? Giving them the floor to speak, sort of like you're doing here, Andrew, with Tiffany and I and Brian, right? We're participating in your community now because you've put us on this webinar. So that's good cachet for people. People can put that on their resume. I wrote a blog article. I participated in these webinars. That's good career cachet for people that you want and you need to be ambassadors in your community. But beyond that, it's do you have good content? Do you have good training available through that community environment? Can they get the support they need? It's just like we've talked about, handling their needs and providing value. So we could go deeper for sure. And I'd love to hear what Tiffany and Brian have to say on this, but you just got to add value to their lives in some way consistently.
I love the gamification piece, but I think just you kind of touched on it, like the core of humanity really is people like to be understood. They like to talk about themselves. They like to make a positive difference in other people's lives or their successes. So what better place or way to do that than being a part of a community where people share your same passion or have your same, career interests and things like that, and just connect. Connection is so huge. And to the point of the pandemic and things, that was a challenge that had to be overcome in communities like Grow, Gain, Retain, where GGR right there. An amazing place to bring that to life. That connection that we had never had to navigate in that way before.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things we do always as part of strategy, with clients around community is we help them build community specific personas, meaning what are the 5 or 6 types of people, predominantly anyway, there might be more, but what are the 5 or 6 type of people that are going to show up to this thing? Why? What do they need? What do we need to build to give them that value, right, that Jay's talking about? I will say, like, as a pro tip for everybody, career is always, in B2B stuff anyway, career is always the number one thing. Even people who tell you, oh, I don't care about my career or whatever, everybody cares because they have to, because it's how they, feed their family and, do their job and that sort of thing. And so if you can align the incentives to say, hey, let me give you speaking opportunities, or let me, here's the leaderboards that you can be on, or here's something you can add to your LinkedIn profile to prove that you're one of the thought leaders in this space. Those kinds of tactics always work really, really well to motivate, I would say, a large portion of people, not everybody, but a large portion of people.
There's definitely a lot that you can attach to the career side of things for sure. Awesome. Kimberly, thank you for your question. Our next question comes from Matt. Matt asks, my current company had set up a LinkedIn user group to create this community idea. And since starting a few months ago, I've noticed that there is little to no traction on the page. Plus, we were having a hard time getting new clients to join and buy into the concept. Any tips on how we can generate more engagement that provides value to everyone?
Well, I'd say, we've kind of discussed this a couple of different ways, but to simplify it maybe for this question, what I would say is very similar to Jay talking about value, right? What are they getting in this community they can't get somewhere else? Like, that's always one of the number one ways, right, to drive people to a community and to get them what they need and for them to feel like they got something out of it, is that they're getting something they can't get somewhere else, right? And so this is where some of those integrations and centralization of content and, different things might take place on a community to make it, for lack of a better term, the one-stop shop, or as close as you can get to a one-stop shop. And then all of a sudden you'll find out that they start showing up and, hopefully feel good about it and get what they want. As far as LinkedIn goes, I think Jay talked about this a little bit as well, that you got to find out where your audience is or where they want to be or what they want to do. And it could be that you need to build a centralized community for all of them to show up to, or it could be that you're building like a hub and spoke model. Maybe the people on Stack Overflow and LinkedIn have completely different ideas about what they want right out of community and need. So when we talk about community strategy, there's certainly the one that you own that has your logo at the top, that's community.yourcompanyhere.com, but there's also everything else, right? And so I would kind of think deeply about who those folks are, why they're there, what they're looking for, and what you can kind of uniquely provide them in that particular channel that's going to, provide them some value.
Well, I think you need to be asking to whiff them, right? From their perspective, what's in it for me, right? Did you create that LinkedIn user group because it was something that your company wanted to do to connect with your customers, or did you think about it from the customer's perspective, right? Because what's in it for me? What's my value? Lack of engagement, typically, to your point, is either you're not meeting them where they want to be, or you're not providing value from their perspective.
Yeah, and I listen, I haven't been to Matt's LinkedIn group, but I would venture a guess that like content, as we say, is queen, right? We often say in the community world, some version of people come for the content and stay for the community, right? And we've seen that time and time again. Again, what's in it for me? Like, are we solving your problem first? Like that needs to come before we think about why you're going to stay and be this great community member and that sort of thing. We need to help people in their moment of need, right? And so when you think about community strategy and what drives success, it's often the case that companies that have really great content strategies that go with the community often excel much more than their peers. And it's just because they are investing in generating a lot of value and knowledge, whether it's podcasts, videos, or text, or whatever it might be. That's what ultimately people want and need content. And then we can talk about engagement, thereafter.
Right.
Yeah, on Matt's question, I'd want to know a little bit deeper too. Coming out of having that plan and SLAs internally going into it, how are you driving customers to that forum to begin with? Is it coming out of individual engagements? Is marketing promoting the forum? And then, is there opportunity to, again, make it easier to get someone in there? They come into your CSM inbox per se, and, ask a question. What if you just explicitly told them, that's a great question for our forum. Let me get a comment, a post started for you there and see what, other types of ideas and thoughts we can get from our community.
I think you said an operative word there. Again, Tiffany, it's a forum. LinkedIn is a good place to have a conversation, it's almost like a group chat. But there's so many other things that aren't there, like the content and the blogs, the learning, the events, like there's just so much. It's just and it doesn't drive engagement to that. I think I'm not picking on LinkedIn because I sort of love LinkedIn. I'm on there a lot, but the group's capability is not a community, right? That it's a group and it's not going to drive engagement into that discussion just because of the way it's set up. So that community technology platforms, and I'm not just talking about ours, but they do a good job at drawing users back in with digests and updates on existing discussions and other pieces of content that draw the users back in. And Brian,
there's also a lot of noise. You're also fighting a lot of noise.
Yeah.
Right. It's like I'm done with Twitter. Right. There's too much there's too much noise. I mean, how can you get anything out of there's just so much noise.
Yeah, so. You come looking for help and it's buried underneath all these J posts. You know what I mean? It's
exactly.
Just like,
that's funny. I can't get Brian out of my feed for some reason. I tried.
I can't get Brian Jay out of my feed. My God.
Brian, come for content, stay for community. I'm stealing that. So just to know.
Hey, that's a free one.
Beautiful.
Send him a bill, Brian. Send him a bill. Awesome, Matt. Thank you for the question. Maggie, thank you for the question. Maggie asks, can you share an average time commitment on the CSM's part for managing a successful community? Is a customer community feasible for a small CS team? And of course, Jay Nathan is gonna jump in on this right out of the gate.
Yeah, I was going to ask if I could just rant for a second.
You can always rant, man. You don't have to ask.
No, I'm not going to rant. I'm sorry. I think this is a great question. So one of the things that I often think about is, how do we stop overloading the CSM role as the be-all, catch-all for everything, support, training, renewals. There's so much that we ask CSMs to do. Now we're thinking community management. At the end of the day, managing a community, to Brian's point, is actually a specialized skill set. And, having the ability to drive sort of a content strategy, to think, have a mindset for one-to-many. A lot of CS teams are tuned to work with one customer at a time, like we've talked about here. So I think I don't know the exact time commitment would be, Maggie, in your business, but I do know that if you start with the data that's driving the workload for your support and customer success teams today, and sort of look at that and try to figure out what you could do to automate and digitize those experiences for customers, or that information or that help that the customer needs, then it probably ends up paying for itself on the back end once you start to put those things in place. I would say, your conservative estimate, you probably need at least, and Brian's I'm really curious what you're going to say back to me on this, Brian, but you need probably at least half of a full-time equivalent headcount working on moderating and overseeing and driving a community forward for it to actually work and grow and be an engaging place for customers to come. And that's probably a good starting point, but I would say it's the minimum. Brian.
Yeah, look, I think the way to think about this actually is it shouldn't all be on the CSM team, right?
Exactly.
Again, back to that collaborative piece. Yeah, you may have one person who is the, community manager, whether they came from inside or outside the house. There's different ways to do that. But the actual mechanics of, how are we going to make great content and answer the questions and make this a great community? Typically, the way to think about it is like, let's start with something simple. If we said to all of our CSMs and our support agents and our pre-sales, anybody who's customer facing normally, if we said, hey, can you just spend like a half an hour every 2 weeks on this thing as like a pilot, and let's see what happens, right? Let's do that for like 4 weeks, 5 weeks, and let's see what kind of impact it's having, not on the, just the community, but also on like our metrics of, are we getting less calls? Are people more informed? Are they happier? Right. And like, let the data guide you, actually, instead of coming up with a hard number to say it must be an hour, or it must be 200 hours or whatever. It's like, let's try just a little bit, and try to see what happens. And then I think over time, what you'll find is that when it does happen, there's kind of almost a tipping point in a lot of organizations where you may have customer facing people who spend almost as much time, creating content and doing events and going to conferences and like other community stuff than they do their like day job. And that's simply because they've understood through the data that gets them more value. And so it's sort of counterintuitive in that way. But, I've certainly built programs like that at companies I've worked at. It's kind of amazing when you get to that point that, you have support people spending 5 hours a week on community, because that saves them 10 hours a week on the back end, right? It's a great exchange, but you have to get there, you need a little bit of faith from those people, and you need a little bit of, you kind of have to prove it to them, right? Or else they're going to say, why are we working on this thing? Why are we spending time? And so it starts with faith, but then with the data, hopefully it ends up being, oh yeah, we want to do more of this because we know it actually makes our lives easier.
I worked for a company for almost 10 years that had a really strong support function and probably one of the most robust knowledge bases on the planet for any product I've ever seen. And it's because writing knowledge base articles and solutions to common problems was part of the job of a support rep, and still is to this day. We have a German customer, and I throw that in there because they're very structured in the way they've engineered their performance management approach. They have actually made participation in the community mandatory on your performance metrics for each quarter. You have to participate in the community a certain number of times to get a certain number of points so that you get your quarterly bonus. So there are ways to incentivize it. I mean, that's a little bit of the carrot and the stick, right? But it's got to be important enough to be part of people's jobs, which means the leadership team has to get it.
I've had in the last 20 years, every operational leadership role that I've held, a component of the variable comp for my people was writing either it's a knowledge base article, a wiki post, a certain number of them every quarter, which I labeled as investment back into the practice, practice investment. It's actually one of something on one of our level 2 courses. People are always asking me, what is practice investment? I'm like, it's in literally what it sounds like. You're investing back into practice. You are doing things that are helping the entire team. And that is making sure that our customers are educated, right? It could be a walkthrough, could be a video that you do, what have you. But that's that. And that's how you get those community forums populated with really, really meaningful stuff. Awesome. Thank you for the question, Maggie. Let's move on to the next one. And remember, we go until 15 past the hour. So we'll get through as many of these questions as we can. Talking about small startups, how do we arrive at a decision on what should our community be all about? What should be the basic steps we should focus on while building a community? I think we covered that pretty much already. Pratyush, thank you for the question. Although it was I think it was answered a little, or was asked a little earlier. We covered that pretty extensively. We got a question from LinkedIn. Thank you once again, Tracy, for monitoring that. From Michelle. Michelle on LinkedIn Live, similar to the ambassador's idea and the effortless experience concept, has anyone cracked the nut of customer to customer networking pairing to get them to collaborate on specific topics? For example, some way for people to say, I know this, or I want to learn this, or a way to funnel requests for a team to find a like company and team. Enterprise CSM seems to be doing a lot of this matching, but could the right community format or channel work better?
Yeah. I mean, 2 things I've done and seen that work really well is one is like customer use case story repositories on community. So provide a place where people are incentivized to come and talk about what they've done, why they did it, and what their outcome was. And through that, people tend to self-select and say, ooh, I want to talk to Tiffany because she's done the thing that I don't know how to do yet, or I want to pick your brain a little bit more about it. The other one is a very strict, more, matching program in particular where you have people fill out some forms and do some things, or there's certainly technology out there that can streamline that as well. I think all of those are good things, but you need to, have a certain scale of your community, I think, before they're going to be fully useful.
Yeah, I think, Michelle, you're kind of spot on there in that I think the CSMs are key players in helping identify who are going to be the best customers to, start those engagements or become those, community badged monitors or whatever, terminology you want to use there, and raise their hands or, them and their use case and how they feel about, your product or, whether you trust them to be candid and forthcoming and recommend that they go get involved and help make those introductions and, again, be a facilitator from the front lines.
Yeah, if you put the mechanism out there for people to ask a question and you sort of encourage them to do that, then it's also going to sort of, the cream is going to rise to the top. The people who know those answers, who are knowledgeable on your product or in the industry that you're serving, are going to answer those questions, and you're going to start to see who those people are, and you'll start to form relationships with them. That's probably the simplest and most scalable version of this. On the far end of the spectrum is what Brian talked about and Tiffany alluded to, is like a mentoring program, which is something you run and manage and operate, which is cool. It's just labor intensive. So there's like middle grounds, and there's a spectrum on these things as well.
It's almost kind of like a chicken and an egg. Like, are we identifying our advocates in the forum, or are we identifying our advocates and sending them to the forum? And I think both, right? Like, in that, having that engagement and internal practices and conversations around what's happening in there to make sure that you're making the most of it from both sides.
Yeah, I think though there's always going to be some hesitation, right, from people reaching out, unless you're always going to have that. It's always going to be a problem. I have that, like for example, I've got this Rodecaster that I use for my podcasting and things like that, and I've had some technical issues, so I've gone on the Rode forum, and I've scanned for solutions to some of the challenges that I've had, and some of these people are incredibly knowledgeable about the technology to the point where it's almost intimidating. Like, okay, so
yeah,
right, am I going to ask, if I ask this question, is this person going to say, "What are you, an idiot?" And you plug the wrong thing in, and so there's that natural hesitation of being exposed.
It's a great point. It's about how you create culture in your community, right? That it's okay to ask questions and it's okay to give answers, and that like we all didn't come out of the womb knowing everything about this product or service, and that there are some sites out there. One of them rhymes with schmack schmoverflow, where that is the case. That you do get sort of drilled for asking questions, and stuff. Yeah. So I think that comes back to your strategy, but also, as Jay was saying, like having someone on board who's a community professional and has done this before, that knows how to create that culture and that environment so that people feel like they can participate without fear of, being told they're stupid or yelled at because the question was already asked 9 years ago or whatever the case might be. It's cultural.
Well, there's structure.
Go ahead.
Go ahead, Tiffany.
It brings up a point that I'd actually like to hear, Jay or Brian, your thoughts on as part of the strategy in rolling out, having that set of decorum or rules for how you behave in the forum. And if you violate those, what happens? And maybe that's a good, kind of segue into the question at hand.
I mean, I think rules are important, but they're also made to be broken, right? And I think, every community needs to have a pretty comprehensive set of guidelines and, sort of documentation about here's what we're trying to build, here's the culture we're trying to make here. But it's more about the actions, right? It's more about how you partner with the influential people, super users, as we've talked about, people inside the company and how they behave, on the community that actually creates the norms and self-policing that can sometimes, take place in lieu of, heavy-handed moderating and whatever. So I think the approach is all of the above, but I think it's about how you partner with the people that are most visible in your community and like them being good stewards of it, so that when other people show up, they say, "Oh, look how Tiffany participated. I want to be like Tiffany. That's great. That's the culture here." And just like anywhere else in life, if you let the brilliant jerks sort of take over, and then that's probably going to be the culture of your community, So again, this is where having some community professionals that know how to sort of orchestrate that is usually a very helpful thing.
Yeah, it's funny how online communities just sort of mimic life a little bit, don't they, Brian? Like they mimic real life. Like we have a challenge from time to time in the Gain, Grow, Retain community. One of our policies is no self-promotion, right? You can't just go in there and advertise your product or your service because everybody would do it. Everybody wants access to that community, right? So, and we have sponsors now that actually pay for access to be able to promote in a classy way in that community. So we have the challenge sometimes of having to go moderate people that are very influential in our community. Heather's on the call. I saw her make a comment earlier. Hey, Heather. But you have to do that in a tactful way. But the thing I was thinking, Brian, as you were starting to talk was whatever you enforce is going to be what the culture is, right? You can't just put a document out there and say, hey, this is what we believe and this is how we act. And then if people act in a different way, you don't correct them, you're going to lose control of the community that way.
Yep, exactly. And you need to maintain control. Michelle, thank you. All right, let's see. Next question comes from Steph. Steph asks, when picking a persona to start with, do you think there is a benefit to going more or less senior to start, i.e., end user versus decision makers or economic buyers? Brian, looks like you want to jump in on this.
Yeah, it's a good question. I think it piggybacks on what we were talking about before around personas, right? I think you need to deeply understand your customer personas and then also translate that to community personas and kind of understand the difference of how they might, what kind of value they might want out of a community versus other interactions you have. I think the answer is whichever one's going to be the one that you can conquer now, right? Like if you stack rank those personas, one may be more important to you than the other in the business, but you may say, it turns out number 2 or number 3 are the ones we have the capability to reach today in the community, right? So I think having a good grip on like the prioritization based on your capabilities and your strategy is good. I think ultimately what you want to do is do all of them, right? Now, I'm not going to give you a timeline on what that is because it's different for everybody. But again, back to successful communities and what do they do really well? They expand over time the use cases and the personas that they cover so that ultimately the community is like something for everyone, and it's there's something there, but that takes a long time, right? Like Rome isn't built in a day. You go look at something like Microsoft's communities or Trailblazer community or Siemens or like any of these kinds of companies, it's taken them a long time to do it. So I think you just have to be realistic about it, but try to figure out in what order you're going to be able to deliver the most value and get the most wins. And then over time, just keep going. Don't ever rest. When you conquer one or you think you're in a good place, start on the next one and just see how many you can rack up, how quickly.
I think you also have to start with where's most of your inbound volume coming from? Where do your customers need the most help? Is it executives trying to answer a question about your product or service, or is it the end users, or is it the administrators? Like who are you really, who's that audience that's going to get the most value out of this and save you time and money as well?
That's what I was thinking. What audience are you going to be able to, this is about scale, right?
Right.
If all of my reach outs, and I would think that the more senior executives, depending on what your business model is, you're going to want your live human CSM to handle. So
yeah, executives in general are a harder audience to engage for pure reasons of their availability and things like that, right? So there are successful executive, thought leadership type communities out there, but I would say it's not the norm, and it's not us, it's you. It's more about their time and availability, right?
Yeah. Well, they're looking at stuff, they got to look at things a mile wide and an inch deep, right? Yeah. So the community is gonna help the people that are much deeper into the weeds. Awesome, Steph. Thank you for the question, Brian. If you can hit the done button there. Next question from anonymous attendee. Looks like, Brian, you want to jump in on this as well. How do you navigate the fact that some companies want to be anonymous? From the anonymous attendee, which I kind of think that they did that on purpose. I would hope they did that on purpose.
I'm going to answer this one anonymously. Most community platforms that I'm aware of, I know HireLogic is this way. When people sign up, they can, like as an administrator, I may be able to see their email address and understand who they are. But as far as their outward appearance goes, if they want to be Fluffy Bunny 22, is their username and whatever, then they can do that. Some people prefer to put in their signature exactly who they work for. People have different thresholds for that. And so I think you want to just provide the different avenues. But yeah, it's super easy for most companies for their people to sign up and participate without ever saying who they work for or anything like that. And especially in B2B communities, that's actually, one of the core principles of engagement is allowing people to do that and that's to kind of go back to the LinkedIn stuff and the Facebook stuff, right? Where you do have to use your real name unless you have like 10 burner accounts like Jay. Using your real name in those types of environments is often a deterrent, right? Because people are thinking, well, what if I say something stupid? Or even worse, in a B2B community, what if my boss comes here and sees me asking a question about something they think I should know the answer to? It's a lot better if Fluffy Bunny 22 asked that question, And so that's why in communities, we try to give people the option as much as possible. And I think that's why LinkedIn struggles sometimes with the community aspect, and Facebook as well, just because you don't have that anonymity or pseudonymity depending on, what you want to do as a user.
Yeah. I just want to point out that Fluffy Bunny 20 through 30 is Jay.
They're on to me.
So if you see,
no, it's Brian. 22 is Brian.
And it's kind of an afterthought on that too. It's not just the psychological safety as like an individual feeling comfortable to engage, but depending on what your solution is and who you're serving, there could actually be business needs from your customers where they want to retain that anonymity because they don't want, if you have a competitor of theirs as a customer, that's its own thing. And like you said, give them the space to operate the way that they need to operate, let alone are comfortable doing so.
Yeah. We actually get this question a lot. And one of the ways that the exact scenario you mentioned, because some companies are, especially like data security companies and maybe even financial services, they're protective over their
government.
Government. They could be asking questions that actually reveal strategies and direction that their companies are going. So what we have done in the past is we'll actually help our customers think through, okay, what is the right set of customers to put in a private subgroup of a community? Just because all of your customers shouldn't be interacting with each other doesn't mean that small subsets that are appropriately parsed by geography or industry can't interact. You lose a massive opportunity to scale if you just say, sorry, we can't do that at all. You throw the baby out with the bathwater if you don't get creative about thinking about it. And in some cases, it's not permissible at all. And I totally understand that.
Right, exactly. Awesome. Thank you for who is that question from? Was that question from, no, that was anonymous. We don't know who that
That's right.
Ironically.
Very
ironically anonymous. Thank you. All right. We probably got time for two more questions, maybe less. Allie asks, does it make sense to build out these communities when your end users aren't very tech savvy? For example, still using flip phones, they can't navigate apps. And is it worth the effort to create a community via in-person events or training sessions? Quick, what do you got? What do you think? Jay, Tiffany, Brian, is it worth it?
Yes, it's worth it.
If they're not tech savvy?
Yes. This is not about tech savviness. It's about solving problems and having the wisdom of the crowd at your disposal for what you're trying to solve for. And sure. I think live and in-person events are a good way to do that. Training sessions can be a good way to do that. They augment this. And a lot of I don't know, I'd be hard pressed to find a lot of companies these days that have customers that can't use email. And a lot of times you get email digests of these conversations that are happening. It's really,
man, you should meet someone from my HOA. Let me tell you something.
Yeah, I think Allie answered the question actually, which is figure out what the right modality is, for your audience and what they want. And if that's in person, local user groups, great. If that's online discussion, great. If that's something else, great. You do you, right? I don't think there's a wrong answer as long as you're serving people the right way.
Yeah. Going back to your opener, Brian, it's all about the value. If what they want and need and crave is in that discussion, they will figure out how to overcome their technology challenges.
Yeah.
Awesome. And one last question I want to get to here from LinkedIn, Alyssa, because it's directed at you, Jay. I am curious about the idea of office hours. And I think Jay was talking about, my team has thought about rolling this out. It sounds like you offer this as a place for your customers to connect and you facilitate the conversation. Is that correct? Thank you.
Yes, that is correct. And it's interesting. People have different definitions of what office hours are. So our definition, though, is it's a group setting. There's typically a topic chosen, but ahead of time, but they happen on a known cadence. So for Gain, Grow, Retain, for example, we've been doing office hours calls either every week or every other week for the past 3 years. So people just know Thursday morning at 11 o'clock. I think that's what time we do them now. Yeah. You can always have access to that group or a group of people who will be meeting at that time. That's really the idea. And you can pick a topic, what's most relevant and salient for your community at that point in time, announce it ahead of time. We use a tool today called Luma, LU.MA, which helps us send out invitations that end up on people's calendars. So not everybody doesn't see everybody else that's on the invite. They get reminders. We get analytics on who attends and who doesn't. We use those for both Gain, Grow, Retain and our own customer communities now. So I think it's a really cool way to build connection and have some live virtual. It's a relatively low lift. You just have to learn how to facilitate a little bit, sort of the way that Andrew is facilitating this conversation.
Yeah, it's not Field of Dreams. Don't show up. You don't expect them to show up and have something to talk about. You've got to be prepared. And I've actually led your GGR sessions before. You have to show up with something, some questions, some topics, what have you. Unfortunately, you moved the timing, so I find it hard to join anymore. But it's not about me; it's about you.
Excuses.
That's all right.
Andrew, your feedback matters.
Does it? Does it really? Does it really?
File that away. We've got your feedback.
File that away, Fluffy Bunny 22.
You can submit it anonymously. Later
exactly.
on.
Awesome. Well, we're at the end of our time that we have for today. I think it was a great conversation, but it's not what I think. It's what all of you think. So please let us know by posting your feedback on LinkedIn and tagging either myself, our guests, or Success Coaching. I want to thank our guests for spending the time with us and for the ideas, the thoughts, the insights, and best practices that you shared. One final note: great CS leaders know they don't have all the answers, but they know where to get them. That's why we created the CS Leadership Roundtable, to harness the knowledge and experience of the community to help improve everyone. We hope to see you again at our next event on April 12th, when we'll be talking about defining the important metrics to track. Until then, make sure to make space for yourself and your mindset every single day, and have a great rest of your week and month, everyone. See you soon.